What if I told you that 40 years ago, a single scientist had already mapped out the exact blueprint for saving our planet, not through expensive technology or political revolution, but through a fundamental shift in how we see ourselves in relation to the cosmos? What if every environmental crisis we face today, every climate disaster we witness, every species we lose, could have been prevented if we had simply listened to the words of Carl Sagan? Tonight, as wildfires rage across continents and polar ice caps melt at unprecedented rates, as entire ecosystems collapse and weather patterns spiral beyond recognition, there's a voice calling from the past with solutions so clear, so scientifically grounded, so profoundly simple that our failure to heed them feels almost criminal. Picture this scene. May 8, 1985. The chambers of the United States Congress. A relatively unknown astronomer from Cornell University steps up to a microphone, carrying with him data that would prove prophetic beyond imagination. The Cold War is at its peak, environmental protection is seen as a fringe concern, and climate change is a term that most politicians have never even heard. But Carl Sagan has spent years studying the atmospheres of Venus and Mars, and what he has discovered about planetary climate systems is about to shake the very foundations of how we understand Earth's future. He clears his throat and begins to speak words that would echo through decades of ignored warnings. The greenhouse effect would change the Earth's climate system in ways that could be catastrophic for human civilization. The room falls silent. Senators shift uncomfortably in their seats. This isn't the kind of testimony they expected from an astronomer. This isn't about distant galaxies or space exploration budgets. This is about survival. This is about whether the third planet from the Sun will remain habitable for the species that has just begun to understand its cosmic address. Sagan continues, his voice steady but urgent. We are conducting a global experiment with our planet's atmosphere, and we have no backup world to retreat to if the experiment goes wrong. 40 years later, as we watch that experiment unfold exactly as Sagan predicted, his words carry the weight of prophecy. Every hurricane that breaks records, every drought that devastates communities, every flood that displaces millions, all of it was foreseen by a man who had learned to read the language of planetary atmospheres. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. Sagan didn't just predict our current crisis. He provided the intellectual framework for preventing it, the scientific methodology for addressing it, and the cosmic perspective necessary to motivate action on a species-wide scale. When Sagan looked at Venus through his telescopes and calculated surface temperatures of 900 degrees Fahrenheit caused by runaway greenhouse effects, he wasn't just studying another planet. He was staring into a possible future for Earth. When he analyzed the thin atmosphere of Mars and understood how a planet could lose its capacity to sustain life, he wasn't conducting abstract research. He was learning the warning signs that could save our world. Every measurement he took, every model he built, every conclusion he drew was simultaneously cosmic science and environmental insurance policy for human civilization. But Sagan's environmental vision went far beyond climate change. In the early 1980s, when nuclear tensions between superpowers threatened global annihilation, he co-authored groundbreaking research on nuclear winter, the devastating climatic cooling that would result from massive nuclear explosions. His calculations showed that a nuclear exchange wouldn't just destroy cities and kill millions immediately. It would plunge the entire planet into a prolonged winter that could end human civilization entirely. This wasn't political activism disguised as science. This was rigorous atmospheric physics, applied to the most pressing survival question of the age. The beauty of Sagan's approach was its integration of scientific rigor with cosmic perspective. He understood that environmental protection wasn't just about preserving natural beauty or saving endangered species, though those were important. It was about recognizing that Earth represents the most extraordinary achievement in cosmic evolution, a planet where matter has organized itself into self-aware beings, capable of understanding their own origins and choosing their own destiny. We are not just biological organisms competing for resources on a rock in space. We are the universe's way of protecting itself, of ensuring that the magnificent experiment in consciousness that took 4 billion years to develop doesn't end in self-destruction. This perspective transforms every environmental issue from a local concern into a cosmic responsibility. When Sagan wrote in 1980, "Our lovely blue planet, the Earth, is the only home we know. Venus is too hot. Mars is too cold. But the Earth is just right. A heaven for humans. He was establishing the scientific foundation for what would become the most important realization of the modern age. We are not just living on Earth. We are Earth's way of taking care of itself. The same consciousness that allows us to understand stellar formation and galactic evolution also makes us capable of understanding and preventing planetary destruction. The tragedy is that we had the knowledge, we had the warnings, we had the scientific framework for action. What we lacked was the wisdom to listen, the humility to act on information that challenged our short-term economic interests, and the cosmic perspective necessary to see beyond tribal concerns to species-wide survival. Sagan spent the last decades of his life not just doing astronomy, but trying to wake up a species that seemed determined to ignore the most important scientific discoveries in human history. He knew that all the telescopes in the world couldn't save us if we refused to apply astronomical wisdom to terrestrial problems. The most remarkable aspect of Sagan's environmental predictions isn't their accuracy, though his forecasts about rising temperatures, melting ice sheets, and catastrophic weather events have proven eerily precise. The most remarkable aspect is how he connected environmental protection to human identity at the deepest possible level. When he described Earth as a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark, he wasn't just offering poetic imagery. He was providing the psychological foundation for planetary stewardship that transcends all the petty divisions that prevent effective environmental action. Consider the profound shift in perspective that occurs when you truly internalize Sagan's cosmic view of environmental responsibility. Climate change is no longer a distant threat that might affect future generations. It becomes an immediate assault on the only known refuge for consciousness in the universe. Biodiversity loss is no longer just an ecological concern. It becomes the destruction of billions of years of evolutionary creativity that may never be replicated anywhere else in the cosmos. Pollution is no longer just a health issue. It becomes the contamination of the most precious and irreplaceable chemistry laboratory in our galaxy. This shift in perspective makes environmental protection not just politically necessary, but spiritually urgent. When Sagan testified to Congress about the greenhouse effect in 1985, he wasn't just presenting scientific data, he was offering lawmakers the opportunity to become cosmic heroes, to be the generation that ensured the continuation of the most important story we know of in the universe. When he wrote about the need for global cooperation in addressing environmental challenges, he wasn't just advocating for international agreements, he was calling for the emergence of planetary consciousness, the recognition that all human conflicts are minor disagreements among passengers on the same cosmic lifeboat. But Sagan's environmental vision was never naive or utopian. He understood that protecting the planet would require the same intellectual discipline that had enabled scientific breakthroughs in every other field. It would require distinguishing between wishful thinking and evidence-based solutions. It would require the humility to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about human impact on natural systems. It would require the patience to implement changes that might not show benefits for decades. Most importantly, it would require the same kind of systematic, collaborative international effort that had already proven successful in space exploration and disease eradication. The path forward that Sagan outlined isn't just about switching to renewable energy or reducing carbon emissions, though those are essential steps. It's about developing what he called planetary thinking, the ability to make decisions based on their impact on Earth's life support systems rather than just their immediate economic or political benefits. This means learning to think in geological timescales while acting with appropriate urgency. It means understanding that what we do to the atmosphere today will affect weather patterns for centuries. It means recognizing that the species we drive to extinction today are gone forever, taking with them millions of years of evolutionary information that could have benefited future generations. Sagan's work on nuclear winter provided a perfect example of this kind of planetary thinking in action. By studying how massive fires and explosions would affect global atmospheric systems, he was able to demonstrate that nuclear war wasn't just a political or military problem. It was an environmental catastrophe that would affect every living thing on Earth, regardless of nationality, ideology, or involvement in the conflict. This research helped change how world leaders thought about nuclear weapons, contributing to arms reduction treaties that may have prevented the very global catastrophe he had calculated. The same analytical approach could be applied to every environmental challenge we face. Climate change isn't just about polar bears or rising sea levels, it's about the stability of the atmospheric systems that make agriculture, civilization, and complex life possible. Deforestation isn't just about losing trees, it's about disrupting the carbon cycles and weather patterns that regulate planetary temperature. Ocean acidification isn't just about marine biology, it's about the chemistry of the water systems that support the entire food web. Every environmental issue, when viewed from Sagan's cosmic perspective, becomes a question of planetary engineering on a scale that affects the entire biosphere. What makes this perspective revolutionary is its ability to cut through the political and economic arguments that typically paralyze environmental action. When you understand that Earth is the only known refuge for life in the universe, arguments about the economic costs of environmental protection become as absurd as arguing about the economic costs of maintaining life support systems on a spacecraft. When you grasp that we are literally made of recycled stellar material and depend on precisely calibrated planetary systems for our existence, debates about whether environmental protection is worth it reveal themselves as discussions about whether existence itself is worth preserving. This is why Sagan spent his final years not just writing about astronomy, but actively lobbying for environmental protection. He understood that all the cosmic discoveries in the world would be meaningless if the species capable of making those discoveries destroyed the conditions that made discovery possible. He saw that environmental protection wasn't separate from scientific advancement. It was the prerequisite for continued scientific advancement. You cannot have a thriving civilization of explorers and thinkers on a planet whose life support systems are failing. If you've felt your understanding of environmental responsibility shifting as we've explored Sagan's cosmic perspective, if you've begun to see climate change and biodiversity loss not just as policy issues, but as threats to the most extraordinary experiment in the universe, then you've experienced the beginning of planetary consciousness. This isn't just another YouTube channel about science. This is a community dedicated to developing the kind of cosmic thinking that could actually save our world. Subscribe not just to learn more about these connections, but to join others who understand that protecting Earth isn't just environmental activism, it's cosmic stewardship of the most precious thing we know of in the universe. Share in the comments. What aspect of Sagan's environmental vision resonates most strongly with you? How has understanding our cosmic context changed your relationship to environmental issues? What would you be willing to change in your own life to help protect the pale blue dot that is our only home? The most devastating aspect of our current environmental crisis isn't the magnitude of the challenges we face. It's how perfectly those challenges validate everything Carl Sagan warned us about, while simultaneously demonstrating our species' remarkable capacity to ignore clear scientific evidence when it conflicts with short-term convenience. Every record-breaking hurricane, every unprecedented wildfire, every mass extinction event is simultaneously a vindication of Sagan's predictive powers and an indictment of our failure to act on information that has been available for decades. But here's what makes this moment uniquely hopeful. The same cosmic perspective that allowed Sagan to see these problems coming also provides the intellectual framework for solving them. When Sagan described the greenhouse effect that turned Venus into a hellish world with surface temperatures hot enough to melt lead, he wasn't just explaining planetary science, he was providing humanity with the most important case study in the history of environmental protection. Venus shows us what happens when greenhouse gases accumulate beyond a planetary atmosphere's ability to regulate temperature. Mars shows us what happens when a planet loses its atmospheric protection and becomes unable to sustain liquid water. Earth shows us what's possible when atmospheric conditions remain stable enough to support the emergence and evolution of complex life. These aren't just astronomical curiosities, they're laboratory examples of how planetary climate systems work and what happens when they fail. The genius of Sagan's approach was his ability to connect these cosmic lessons to terrestrial policy. When he testified to Congress in 1985 about the greenhouse effect, he was essentially saying, "We've seen this movie before, on other worlds, and we know how it ends." The question is whether we're wise enough to learn from planetary examples rather than becoming one ourselves. His message was clear. We have the scientific knowledge to prevent environmental catastrophe, but only if we're willing to think and act at planetary scales, rather than limiting ourselves to local short-term concerns. But Sagan's environmental legacy goes far beyond climate change. His research on nuclear winter demonstrated how human activities could trigger global environmental catastrophe through routes other than greenhouse gas emissions. His work showed that the smoke and debris from large-scale fires, whether caused by nuclear weapons, massive volcanic eruptions, or extensive wildfires, could block enough sunlight to disrupt photosynthesis, collapse food webs, and trigger global cooling that could last for years. This research established the scientific foundation for understanding how interconnected Earth's environmental systems are, and how disruptions in one system can cascade through the entire biosphere. This systems thinking is perhaps Sagan's most important contribution to environmental protection. He helped us understand that Earth isn't just a collection of separate environments, forests, oceans, atmosphere, ice caps, that can be managed independently. It's a single integrated system where changes in any component affect every other component. The carbon dioxide released by burning fossil fuels doesn't just stay in the local atmosphere. It becomes part of global atmospheric chemistry that affects weather patterns, ocean acidity, and plant growth worldwide. The species that go extinct in one ecosystem don't just disappear locally. They remove genetic information and ecological relationships that could have contributed to the resilience of life on Earth for millions of years. Understanding these connections transforms how we approach every environmental challenge. Instead of treating climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and resource depletion as separate problems requiring separate solutions, we can recognize them as different symptoms of the same underlying issue: humanity's failure to understand its role in planetary systems. We're not just residents of Earth, we're active participants in the same biogeochemical cycles that regulate atmospheric composition, climate stability, and ecological diversity. Everything we do affects these systems, and these systems' health determines whether our civilization can continue to exist. This perspective reveals why technological solutions alone, while necessary, are insufficient to address our environmental challenges. We can develop more efficient solar panels, more effective carbon capture systems, and more sustainable manufacturing processes, and we should. But unless we also develop the kind of planetary consciousness that Sagan advocated, we'll continue to treat these technologies as ways to maintain our current lifestyle rather than as tools for creating a genuinely sustainable relationship with Earth's natural systems. Sagan understood that true environmental protection requires what he called a new consciousness that sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed. This isn't mystical thinking, it's practical recognition of how planetary systems actually work. When we pollute rivers, we're contaminating the water cycle that sustains all terrestrial life. When we clear-cut forests, we're disrupting the carbon and oxygen cycles that regulate atmospheric composition. When we cause mass extinctions, we're reducing the genetic diversity that makes ecosystems resilient to environmental changes. We are literally at war with the life support systems that make our existence possible. But recognizing this also reveals the path forward. If we can develop the cosmic perspective that Sagan spent his life promoting, the ability to see ourselves as participants in planetary evolution rather than separate from natural systems, we can begin making decisions that support rather than undermine the conditions that make complex life possible. This means learning to evaluate every policy, every technology, every economic system based on its impact on planetary health rather than just its immediate benefits to human populations. The most hopeful aspect of Sagan's environmental vision is its integration of scientific rigor with genuine optimism about human potential. He never doubted that our species has the intellectual capacity to solve the environmental challenges we've created. We've already demonstrated our ability to understand planetary systems, predict environmental changes, and develop technologies that work with natural processes rather than against them. What we need now is the wisdom to apply these capabilities at the scale and speed that planetary protection requires. This wisdom isn't just intellectual, it's emotional and spiritual. It requires feeling connected to the cosmic processes that created us, responsible for the planetary systems that sustain us, and motivated by love for the only world we know that supports the extraordinary phenomenon of consciousness itself. As we reach the culmination of our journey through Carl Sagan's environmental vision, we arrive at the most crucial realization of all. We are living at the exact moment when his predictions about planetary destruction and his prescriptions for planetary protection are being tested on a global scale. The question is no longer whether Sagan was right about the environmental challenges we would face. The evidence of his prescience surrounds us in every weather report, every species extinction announcement, every climate refugee crisis. The question is whether we have the courage and wisdom to implement the solutions he outlined before the window of opportunity closes forever. The path forward that Sagan illuminated isn't just about policy changes or technological innovations, though both are essential. It's about completing the most important evolutionary step our species has ever attempted: the transition from tribal thinking to planetary thinking, from local loyalty to cosmic citizenship, from short-term survival to long-term stewardship of the conditions that make consciousness possible in the universe. This transition isn't optional or theoretical. It's the practical requirement for continued human existence on Earth. When Sagan wrote, "We are rare and precious because we are alive, because we can think as well as we can. We are privileged to influence and perhaps control our future." I believe we have an obligation to fight for life on Earth, not just for ourselves, but for all those humans and others who came before us and to whom we are beholden, and for all those who, if we are wise enough, will come after. He was articulating the philosophical foundation for environmental action that transcends all political, economic, and cultural divisions. This isn't about liberal or conservative politics. It's about the continuation of the most extraordinary experiment in the universe. The cosmic perspective that Sagan championed reveals that environmental protection isn't sacrifice. It's enlightened self-interest at the species level. When we protect the atmospheric systems that regulate climate, we're protecting the conditions that make agriculture possible. When we preserve biodiversity, we're maintaining the genetic library that could provide solutions to future challenges we haven't even imagined yet. When we transition to renewable energy, we're learning to live on the cosmic income of solar radiation, rather than depleting the fossil fuel savings account that took millions of years to accumulate. Every environmental protection measure is simultaneously an investment in human survival and a demonstration of our worthiness to inherit the cosmos. But perhaps most importantly, Sagan showed us that environmental protection is how we become the species we're capable of being. We are the first known beings in the universe who can understand planetary systems, predict environmental changes, and consciously choose to protect the conditions that support life. This capacity for planetary stewardship isn't just something we can do, it's something we must do if we want to justify the 4 billion years of evolution that produced us. We are evolution's greatest achievement, but only if we use our capabilities to ensure that evolution can continue. The practical steps for implementing Sagan's environmental vision are clear and scientifically validated. We need to rapidly transition energy systems to renewable sources that work with natural processes rather than against them. We need to develop agricultural methods that enhance rather than degrade soil systems and biodiversity. We need to design industrial processes that contribute to rather than undermine the circular flows of materials that characterize healthy ecosystems. We need to create economic systems that account for the true costs and benefits of environmental impacts, rather than treating natural systems as free resources or waste repositories. But implementing these changes requires the kind of international cooperation and long-term thinking that only becomes possible when people understand their cosmic context. This is why Sagan spent his final years not just advocating for specific environmental policies, but trying to cultivate the planetary consciousness that makes effective environmental action emotionally and intellectually compelling. He understood that we cannot protect what we don't love, and we cannot love what we don't understand, and we cannot understand our relationship to Earth without understanding our relationship to the cosmos that created both us and our planet. The most inspiring aspect of living at this moment in history is that we still have time to prove Sagan right about humanity's potential, rather than just his predictions about our dangers. Every person who chooses renewable energy, every community that protects local ecosystems, every nation that commits to carbon neutrality, every international agreement that prioritizes environmental protection, all of these actions are evidence that our species is capable of the planetary thinking that Sagan believed was essential for our survival and flourishing. But time is not unlimited. The environmental systems that regulate climate stability, maintain biodiversity, and purify air and water have momentum and thresholds. Some changes, once triggered, become irreversible on timescales relevant to human civilization. This is why Sagan's message wasn't just optimistic, it was urgent. We have the knowledge and capabilities needed to create a sustainable relationship with planetary systems, but we must implement them quickly enough to prevent the kind of cascading environmental failures that could make technological solutions insufficient. The choice before us is the same choice that Sagan spent his life trying to help us understand. We can continue treating Earth as an unlimited resource for short-term exploitation, or we can begin treating it as the irreplaceable sanctuary for consciousness that it actually is. We can continue making decisions based on tribal loyalties and quarterly profits, or we can start making decisions based on our shared identity as cosmic citizens, responsible for the only known refuge for life in the universe. If Sagan's vision of planetary protection and cosmic responsibility has awakened something deep in your understanding of what it means to be human in the 21st century, if you feel called to be part of the generation that finally implements the environmental wisdom he spent his life developing, then you've found more than just educational content. You've found your cosmic mission. This community exists for people who understand that protecting Earth isn't just environmental activism, but the most important expression of cosmic consciousness that our species has ever attempted. Subscribe not just to stay informed about environmental science, but to connect with others who are committed to becoming the kind of planetary citizens that Carl Sagan believed we could be. Share in the comments what aspect of his environmental vision inspires you most, what changes you're willing to make in your own life to protect our pale blue dot, and what you think would convince more people to embrace the cosmic perspective that makes environmental protection feel not like sacrifice, but like the greatest adventure in human history. Together, we can ensure that nothing and nobody will ever hurt our planet again, because we have finally learned to listen to the cosmic wisdom that Carl Sagan spent his life trying to share with us.